welcome to Enduring Journey to Bliss. My name is Deanne and welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to be taking this Phalaenopsis Orchid that I purchased at Lowe's from their reduced plant shelf. At Lowe's they typically have plants that may not look pristine any longer. They may have some things that don't look visually as pleasant. In this particular one, I was surprised. It actually had a little name. I've bought two recently at Lowe's from the dead plant shelf, or the not so nice plant shelf, that actually had the names. Typically, historically, because I've been doing orchids for at least 15 years or longer, they did not have, they didn't have near the selection they do these days, and they would not have any kind of an ID typically. So when I bring these home, I isolate the plants just in case they have any kind of spider mites, or they have mealybugs, or they could have some kind of disease such as fusarium or something like that. I don't see any indication of that. These have been isolated now almost 2 weeks. So I'll bring them home, put them in isolation. I do soak them. I go ahead and I give them a nice drink. As you can see in the bottom bottom of this glass, there's a little bit of liquid still in it. And I give them a good soak, and I'll change out this water probably about every 3 to 4 days. I'll refresh the water that's in the little container for them. That kind of just begins to rejuvenate the plant because, they've been put in a semi-truck or whatever they put them in and shipped across the country, and they landed up at the Lowe's shelf. And the people at Lowe's, of course, they may not be a plant expert, and they don't have the time, because I'm sure they do multiple tasks at the store, the employees. So this one, as you can see, the leaf here is beginning to be reabsorbed, and what that means is that the main orchid plant is taking the nutrients from the outer tips of the leaf, bringing them down and reabsorbing them into the crown of the plant. That's a typical normal process. Doesn't mean this plant is dying. It means that plant is doing what it does in nature. It would do that if it was living on a tree, growing up a tree in nature. So I'll go ahead and I'll take this out, and I'll share with you how I continue with my process of having this orchid. So as you can see through the clear pot, since I have been letting this soak, it has quite a few nice green looking roots in there. So once we get this off, we'll see what we have. We actually have, you kind of give it a little squeeze, kind of give it some squeezes, gently begin pulling downward as you're squeezing, and it will loosen up and come right off. And so this is now trash. Set it over here for now, out of the way. So now we can actually take a good look at this root mass and at the sphagnum moss this plant has been living in, surviving in. Now those are beautiful. That is gorgeous. Now through this transition, I might lose every single one of those, but that happens with plants. Even with plants in the ground, older roots will die, become a part of the soil they're living in, and new roots develop. So I'm not that concerned. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we will start removing the sphagnum moss from this, and we'll see what we have. So you kind of just grab a section and pull gently. You don't want to hurt the plant. You don't have to be excessively gentle, but you do want to kind of be a little bit gentle, and as you're pulling, if you get resistance, that could be, now here's part of a dead root, and that is fine. But if you get resistance, you could be pulling on a viable root, so that's why you want to be a little bit careful on how you remove this sphagnum moss. I removed the sphagnum moss for multiple reasons. Who knows how long this little plant has been surviving in this sphagnum moss. I don't truly know the quality of the sphagnum moss, and I don't know if there might be critters living down in this sphagnum moss. And I want to get a look at all of the roots that this particular Phalaenopsis orchid currently has on it. And after this is all removed and the orchid is cleaned up, I will let it set probably 5 days or so. The roots will kind of dry, and that's a typical process again for orchids. And then I'll either pot it into just as a water culture. I'll grow it in water full-time. Not full-time. Even in water culture, you have to empty the water because orchids have to have a wet, dry cycle to grow. So I'll either put this into a water culture growing environment, or I may decide to put this one in lava rock or some kind of substrate like that is inert, or I might put it in orchid bark. I don't typically plant my Phalaenopsis back into a sphagnum moss growing medium, but I will make that decision here in probably another 3 to 7 days, depending on how things go. So as you remove the sphagnum moss, you will begin to see some very light colored, unless you have a very sick orchid, you'll begin to see some light colored roots. Hopefully that's coming through. See how these are a little bit lighter? They're not the vivid green. And that is simply because they have been down inside the sphagnum moss and had no opportunity for any kind of light to touch the roots for photosynthesis to happen. As they get exposed to the light, they would begin to green up as well. Okay, so I'm going to remove this little spike spike holder that they have here. Let's see if I can do this without hurting my little plant. I'm going to push it up, and then I'll pull it down and out. I'm not going to take the clip off quite yet because I don't want to snap the spike. I'm going to take off this one as well over here. This one they have on with a little wire. This is typical. It's just a little wire, so you just unbend the wire off of it, and then I can remove the little piece of I don't know if that's a wood or a plastic that they had in there holding that up. But anyway, those are there to, keep the spikes growing upright. Now in nature, these would be hanging on the side of a tree trunk, kind of like this. And so there'd be no spikes, or excuse me, there'd be none of these spike holders attached to a tree. Maybe a tree limb. They might go out and lean on a tree limb. But anyway, so I've removed those to help with the removal of this sphagnum moss, essentially, at this point. So I'll continue the process, just taking this out, cleaning this up. And now if I need to, I have my isopropyl 70% alcohol here on the table with me. If I need to, I will utilize that. And I do have my little shears, little Fisker shears. If I need to remove anything, I will first sanitize it with the isopropyl alcohol, because we don't want to spread any kind of disease or any issues that this orchid might have based on how it's been living. Get as much of this out as I can. You don't have to be overly particular, but you do want to remove because if you're putting this in bark, it's not quite as important. Or if you're putting it in a lava rock, because that's just going to, as you water and as you do flushes on your orchids, any little pieces of sphagnum moss will flush through. Eventually they'll break down and flush through. If you're going to grow it in water, then it's important to get as much of the sphagnum moss off as you can, because it can it'll rot in water, and that can cause all kinds of issues for your orchid, and for you, since you are the caregiver of the plant. So we're getting pretty close to the point where I would take this in and I would wash it. I like to use a Lowe's or a Home Depot bucket, like their 5-gallon buckets. Fill it up with water, not all the way full, but maybe about a quarter to a half full of water. And then I will dunk this a few times, kind of like if my hand was the bucket, I'd be dumping like this. And that helps to loosen any of this remaining sphagnum moss that I wasn't able to get off. Now here is a root that looks like to me it was trying to grow as a aerial root, but somehow, it has passed as I pull off this. This is velamen. It's the outer coat of an orchid. So this is the actual root of the orchid, is this thin little part that is inside this nice green lush looking velamen. The velamen grabs all of the nutrients and the moisture, pulls it into the root, and then the root takes that moisture, the nutrients, and feeds it to the crown of the orchid plant. So, but because that was dead, as you could see, as I pulled that off, I removed it. All it's going to do is continue to rot. We don't need that on the orchid as we're moving forward anyway. Now, a lot of times in this process, especially if I'm doing water culture, I will keep this root, because even though there's no velamen, if this little root is in moisture, theoretically it will take some moisture and bits of nutrients up to the crown. So if you have a very sick orchid, I would not remove all of these. I would leave those to help in a very small way, but to at least help the orchid as it's trying to recover in your care. So I think this is about down to the point where I need to go take it and dunk it into my little pot. And the reason I do that is I don't want any of this sphagnum moss to clog up my plumbing in my house. So I will do the little swish around in the 5-gallon bucket a few times, and then I will take that outside and I will put it on some of my plants out in the garden. But I don't want sphagnum moss or anything like that clogging up my plumbing. So there we go. So as you can see, some of those have the real light color. They're still firm to the touch. When I touch them, there's still resistance. They're still firm. So I'm not going to remove anything that's firm. And I think I got pretty lucky, even though this was on the half price Lowe's shelf. These all feel pretty firm still, except for that one I removed earlier that was mushy and dried up. And so the aerial roots, when they dry, they'll have this silvery look to them. Typical. That's a healthy orchid. Well, this might not be healthy orchid yet, but this, for them to turn silver, that is fine. Now, if I were to water this, and when I go dunk it, this is going to green up. Once they're exposed to water, those will green up. Here you can see kind of the silver up here, where it was outside of the soaking cup that I had it in. These are kind of silver, that silverish color too. When an orchid has these nice green roots on it, there's no need to water it. Once they begin to be this color, that's when your orchid is signaling to you that it's time to water it. So I do fertilize with a very weak solution that I put together. I get a gallon of filtered water from my sink, my kitchen sink, and then I add, depending on where I'm at in my watering cycle, I'll either add CalMag and seaweed and some Epsom salt. That's like 1 week, and then another week I'll do nothing but water, and then another week I'll do the seaweed, and I'll do some like the fertilizer that's like in little balls, it's almost like a Miracle-Gro, but I don't use Miracle-Gro because that has chemicals, and I like to grow my plants organically. But I think it's called K-Lite. I'd have to look it up. I apologize. But, and so that way, theoretically, since I change every time I water what nutrients I'm giving the plant, they will be getting a nice balanced nutrition. They're not always getting the exact same nutrients every time, and that helps give you a very healthy orchid. So this orchid did have some nice buds on it when I purchased it. They aren't pristine. I did have to remove a few as well, but like this one here, I don't know if it's going to come through on the camera. It's kind of got a little tear there in the petal. I had to remove some. Over here you can see more. There's some petal damage on this one. Petal damage on this one. But that's okay. Buds and blooms come and go. That is the life cycle. This one, it's torn in a couple places. And I did have to remove some. It also had a broken stem that was snapped and kind of just hanging, which that's probably the true reason this was on the reduced rack at the Lowe's near me. But if you look here, you can see here on this stem, there is a new spike, possibly. Well, it is there. I don't know if it will continue to grow or not. That's what I meant by possibly. So theoretically, this would become another flower spike, which would give me more blooms. So that's always good to see. And I don't think this stem had any. Again, things are broken on it. This was broken. But, oh, and here also, same stem. Let me turn it this way. So we had this one right here. And then if we come down to the next node, growing node, I don't know if you're going to see that, but I see it. There's a tiny little right behind or in front of my finger, if it'll focus for you. So that node looks like it might give me another spike as well. So that's 2 additional side spikes off of this one spike, theoretically. So this one does not have any new bud growth from where it was snapped at the store. But this spike, if we move and look behind these flower petals, you can see a new bud. So that means that this is continuing to extend, and it will continue to grow. The spike will get taller, and it will give me more blooms. Hopefully that's coming through. I think it's focusing on the yellow flowers, but it's right there. Hopefully you can see that. Kind of looks like a mitten, almost. Anyway, so I think this is going to be a good addition to my overall orchid collection. This here, I will leave it. This plant here, where it's reabsorbing itself, I will leave it until it is yellowed all the way down. And the plant, once it gets yellow all the way down, the plant eventually will just drop that. Or if it hasn't dropped it and I feel it's dry enough, I'll go ahead and remove it. I'll grab another orchid here that's very close, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Give me just a moment. See if I can reach this orchid over here. I'll pull it up and bring it over. So I will be watering today. So this orchid, it's dry right now because I need to do my watering. But on this orchid, as you can see, this bottom leaf, it has yellowed all the way back to the stem. That is a natural part of the growing process. All those nutrients have now been reabsorbed back into the crown of this plant. Again, it's watering day. You can tell that because these look kind of dried and sad. This was another orchid that I like to rescue orchids. So, but I am getting, you know, some nicer new growth here from the crown of the plant. And I also have buds forming on this. This was an old stem that I did not cut off, and now I have new buds forming on it. I also have on this old stem I did not remove. Can't quite see it. There you go. That can continue to grow into another spike off of that old spike that I did not cut all the way off. And right here, hopefully this is going to show for you. There's a spike off of an old stem I did not remove, and here is another spike. Hopefully you can see that the buds are forming and it's continuing to grow. So just like this one absorbed all those nutrients from the bottom leaf, took it back into the plant, into the crown of the plant, the base of the plant, to share those nutrients with the new leaf formation, the bud formation. That's what this one is doing as well. It's pulling all those nutrients from the bottom leaf and bringing them into the plant. Now, if this yellowing was up here and it was from the center, then I'd be looking at possible crown rot or disease. But because of where this discoloration is taking place, because I've grown orchids for so long now, I know this is a typical normal process. It is not an unhealthy sign for me. And so I will just leave it and it'll come off eventually. So I will give you another close-up here of these current blooms. Many times in this process, these blooms are going to come off anyway eventually. That's just the life cycle. But these will begin to fade. Let's see if I can get that upright so it looks a little better on the camera without hurting the plant. Maybe not. I don't want to snap my little stem. But anyway, you know, as they fade, that's part of the growing process. And it's nothing to be concerned about. It happens to your rose bushes. It happens to your tulips. It happens to all plants that produce flowers. So, but because of this process, these might fade a little bit sooner than they would have possibly if this was already growing in my collection. I might be able to keep blooms for 1 to 2 months, depending on the orchid. But these I may lose because I am disturbing the roots, because I am changing the growing medium. Those are all stressors for a plant. But that won't bother me one bit. If they lose these buds, I know that I have possible new buds that will be forming because I have these new little spikes that are starting to form on these little nodes. And even if I lost those, this is just joining my collection. Next year, about this time, theoretically, if I take care of it, I'm going to have new spikes for next year's blooming season. Typically a Phalaenopsis, unless it's a species, they do bloom and produce their flowers in your care during the November through February time frame in the United States. So we're in the northern hemisphere, so typically anywhere from November up through February you're going to have the spikes forming and the buds forming, and then you're going to have the blossoms. As I showed you on this orchid, I'll bring it back over. We are at November 16th today, I believe, and you can see that this is forming buds. And I have other orchids in my collection that I could show you. I won't right now for the sake of time, but they are also forming buds because it's that time of the year for them. And there's the other little buds. Hopefully that's going to focus. Goodness. Anyway, so it's just that time of year for this to happen. So I do have one. I will move my camera here. It's pretty close, so it's not going to be